Recently I've been thinking about this Buddhist concept of wise view. And it's come about, I think I pay particular attention to it at times when things are challenging. And so recently I had three events that were really challenging. A couple of deaths to very important people to me, big transition going on. So it's like, okay, let's see or feel how this practice is showing up to support during times like this. And you've all had times in your life where things kind of bunch up and it becomes a challenge. And then it's, as we say, where the rubber meets the road. So that's when this Buddhist concept of wise view or wise perspective or right view is going to be available to support us as we do our grieving or whatever is required. So a cartoon I found, probably can't see it from here, so I'll explain it. It's your basic cartoon of someone marooned on a tiny little island. It's about 10 feet across. There's one ratty-looking palm tree, and the person is standing there, and their clothes are kind of worn away. And there's this small boat in the distance, and the person on the island is like, boat, boat. Then the other frame is from the perspective of that small boat. And there's another disheveled person in this very small rowboat, and he sees this tiny little island with the one palm tree, and his arms are raised, and he's going, land, land. So it's perspective, Good luck to both of them. So your view or your perspective of how this all works, how this creation operates, is ultimately going to determine the level of happiness or suffering that you'll experience. If your view is a wise one, so to speak, a view that's aligned with nature and not opposed to nature, you're going to suffer less. It's just the way it works. And the Buddha taught that wise view, which is one of the path factors of the Eightfold Path, is essential both in the beginning of your practice and at the end. Now, in the beginning, and all of you have had this experience, you've had to have some kind of inkling that a contemplative practice might be beneficial to you. Or you wouldn't start. You wouldn't even be interested. You certainly wouldn't be here. So that's already happening. Okay? That's the beginning. And as your practice matures, you build up significant experience in your practice, that view or that perspective becomes richer, more nuanced, and more aligned with the natural flow of this creation. And as we all either experience or hope to experience, there's a decrease in suffering, an increase in joy, happiness, peace, etc. So I think I'll just give a couple of minutes of context for those that are maybe new to this practice or Buddhism. And the Eightfold Path is a path of practice for the realization of the end of suffering. That's how it's framed. And the Buddha offers 3 areas of training in this practice. The first is in sila. Now, sila is a Pali word for personal integrity or ethics. And that has to do with your speech and your behavior. And it involves three practices. The practice of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So you see that's an external kind of movement into the world. And whether any of those actions in the world cause harm or cause harmony. So that's our reflection. Now the second part of the training is in samadhi. And that's a Pali word for the gathering of the energies of the heart and mind, building the power of those instruments so that we can aim them at phenomena, at our experience, and see deeply into the workings of this creation. And that's what we're doing here. We train in meditation practice. And the trainings under that umbrella are called wise or right effort, wise or right mindfulness, and wise or right concentration. Now the third area of training is panya, and the translation for that is wisdom. Okay? Wisdom, which involves the practices of wise view or perspective and wise intention or thought is the way it's laid out. So there's two aspects to that. And so this path of practice, all 8 of these factors, it's not a linear deal where you do one and then you do another. Well, that would be a lot easier, I think. It's not. They're all kind of functioning together. They're interpenetrated. They support one another. And so you all have a pretty good idea about sila and personal integrity and how to go about that. You know, you're just continually reflecting on whether a particular set of words or actions is going to cause harm or not. And we can kind of monitor that carefully, reflect back. Did it cause harm? How could we maybe act in a more skillful, harmonious way in the future, etc. It's a lifetime of work. Likewise, samadhi training. I mean, we've got the Buddha gave over 40 different meditations to practice. You know, we're barely scratching the surface here, but they're all available, and so we're endeavoring to re-engineer, as we now know, this brain and nervous system through these practices, and it can be measured. So we're developing the capacity to be relaxed and alert at the same time, those two major factors of meditation. So that's the samadhi aspect. And so these wisdom practices, now what about those? I mean, how do you practice wisdom? You know, it's like the other ones that kind of get it. Do the meditation, pay attention to our actions and our speech. Now, with right view and right intention, well, first of all, with right intention, it's really inclining the mind to stay more present to what's happening right now and recognizing accurately what's going on, and to enhance any thoughts that we might have that are loving, compassionate, joyful, or peaceful or balanced, okay? Now, right view has a lot of interesting complexity to it. U Tejaniya, a Burmese teacher, says this: right view inspires and motivates you to try and capture and build upon the elusive thread of wisdom that drew you into meditation practice. The elusive thread of wisdom that you all have, that somehow got you interested in this stuff. When I think back, and you all could, I mean, when I think back, my elusive thread of wisdom had to do with experimenting in graduate school with what we might call plant medicines or hallucinogenic drugs, and basically having the doors of perception opened or blown off the hinges. And my elusive thread of wisdom, somewhere in there, told me, well, this just isn't, it's not appropriate for me, that's not, can't be the totality of a path. It was too unpredictable. And really, I wasn't able to integrate those experiences into my daily life. So something more integrative or integrative was necessary. So yoga and meditation seemed to make more sense on a long-term basis. So that was my little elusive thread of wisdom that kind of aimed me in that way. And you all had something that piqued your interest in meditation along the way. Whether it was suffering became acute and you heard that, oh my gosh, they're talking about the end of suffering. Well, I'll take some of that. Or a friend, encouraged you to, take a mindfulness-based stress reduction course or something like that got you going. So the challenge now that you are practitioners and that elusive thread of wisdom has you interested is, how do you augment that thread of wisdom? How do you enhance it, allow its full potential? And this from the Buddha. Bhikkhus, which is the word for students or those in his order, monks and nuns, but it also refers to anyone who's practicing. He says, bhikkhus, just as the dawn is the forerunner and first indication of the rising of the sun, so is right view the forerunner and first indication of wholesome states. And in another discourse he says, for one of right view, bhikkhus, right intention springs up. For one of right intention, right speech springs up. For one of right speech, right action springs up. For one of right action, right livelihood springs up. For one of right livelihood, right effort springs up. For one of right effort, right mindfulness springs up. For one of right mindfulness, right concentration springs up. For one of right concentration, right knowledge springs up. For one of right knowledge, right deliverance springs up. Well, it sounds like a very springy practice, everything's springing up. And I joke, but really, the practice is alive. It has energy to it. All these various aspects of the path, requires your energy. There's an activation there. It requires curiosity, exploration. One of the most appealing aspects of Buddhism to contemporary folks is that the Buddha never asked anybody to believe anything on blind faith. Now, mindfulness practice, it does require a disciplined mental effort. No question about that. And a kind of detailed empirical inquiry. That's going on. And in your practice, you're always asked to kind of reflect and understand, But it does not require blind faith. Jeff spoke about that a few weeks ago, I think, or last week, whenever it was. In the Samaditi Sutta, Samaditi means wise view. The Buddha also talks about this in a condensed way, this chain of cause and effect that leads to suffering. At each point in the chain, he emphasizes that look, you have to understand, you have to discern, you have to notice that if there's a tendency grasping towards something, and if you don't notice that, and that solidifies, and you're holding on, that you're going to suffer. If you can see, if you can learn that holding tight onto something, whether it's an idea or a thing or a person, that's appealing to you, that's a setup. That tight grasping is a setup for suffering, either pretty quickly or definitely later. Whether that thing you want to grasp forever is this person of your dreams, or you want to hold on to your youth, or your job, or a tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It won't stay like it is. That person's going to change. You're going to grow old. The job might, these days, become either obsolete, or you may end up with a boss or coworkers that make it unpleasant to be there. And the ice cream might melt, or if not that, it might get freezer burn, sitting in your freezer. So at the very least, there'll be some disappointment. But you might suffer mightily in trying to grasp onto things that you like and hold them the way they are. I had my 50th high school reunion not that long ago. And my old friends and I were going through the yearbooks, and all the stuff that people wrote in there. And some of the stuff, don't ever change. Stay the way you are. It's like, boy, was that dumb, Good luck with that. I mean, aging and the rigors of life, all the joys and sorrows. They do their work on you regardless of what you'd like to see happen. Or the wishes of your friends back when you were 18 years old. Don't ever change. Love that one. And it's not enough to be told about the nature of impermanence. This practice really puts our nose in it, to kind of get down in it and feel it on the micro and macro levels. Whether it's the sound of a worker nearby doing their work and the sound comes up and it flowers and then it dissipates. Or whether it's an emotion or a sensation in the body. Or a chronic pain that we think must be this solid thing, but when we take a look at it, we notice it has peaks and valleys. It intensifies. It backs off, back and forth. Everywhere we look, internally, externally, there's this change, this law of nature. And when we fight it, we're gonna suffer. It's like trying to hold on to a rope that we can't hold on to. We get rope burn when it's pulled through our hands. So this business, that for everything, every phenomena, there are causes that bring it forward. We may not know what all those causes are, but they're there. And so our practice is to recognize this movement of nature. There's cause and effect in our lives, outside around us. And we're trying to monitor what actions do we take that lead to harm and that we can do something about. And it's complex. It can take decades to get clarity on certain aspects of parts of our life. If not lifetimes, if you believe in that. Just coming to terms with Christianity has the commandment not to kill. In Buddhism, it's a reflection on not taking life. Just how complex that is. How do we land with that? Are there just wars? Can we take life justifiably? And what about capital punishment? And how does that juxtapose with abortion? And Does a fetus ever have rights? When is it a person? What, all these questions. Buddhism doesn't necessarily give the answers to these, but it says reflect on these things. What about the enslavement and eating of animals? Are they just part of the food chain? Hey, we all got to eat on the food chain. I like Italian sausages or whatever you like. I'm going to eat it. And what about the killing effect of unconscious bias? Not understanding your unconscious biases, whether it's around privilege that you have by virtue of your skin color, or other biased opinions that have been installed. And those unseen biases can have a crushing effect on others. And we all do, if we remain kind of tacitly blind, we're tacitly supporting institutions and economic systems that harm certain populations. And the complexities of being alive are amazing. And what about this footprint, our environment that we may be finding out has a finite holding capacity? And many people are concerned with this. So what's appropriate in using resources? We all have to think that through. A conscious person is dealing with that all the time. There's all kinds of interesting arguments. One argument that kind of threw me, someone had been given some grief in the parking lot, and they were driving a big Humvee, 12 cylinders, whatever it is, some gargantuan thing. Single guy, that's what he wanted. And a woman in a Subaru with 4 children giving him a hard time. And he said, wait a minute. The footprint for each of your children is greater than the footprint of this thing I'm driving. So how do we work with all this? So it can be useful to have a framework to work from. And all contemplative practices have a framework. Or a reasonable doctrines that you can enter into, a teacher that you can trust. Not from blind faith, at least in this particular form of practice or contemplative art. But confidence in a teacher that has shown benefit to you and others over a period of time. It's like following the advice of a doctor. Maybe the first time you're into that doctor, well, even though maybe they're recommended by a friend, you might be a little like, is this person a quack? What's going to happen? But if they've helped heal you on several occasions, you kind of relax into their program when they tell you to do something. And it doesn't mean that you put your critical intelligence on hold and you continue to ask questions, kind of testing the doctor's theories, and you investigate for yourself. It's part of what we do when we kind of turn ourselves over to a doctor. So you've all stumbled across somehow some portion of the Buddha's teachings. Okay? And they've been going on for 2.5 millennia, and a lot of people swear to their benefit. And of course now we've got all this modern psychological research and other kind of brain imaging that are kind of proving in a quantitative way that there's some benefit here, okay? So you consciously take up the practice of these teachings. And you test them. And you refine them over time. and we're uncovering our how we're conditioned. And if we think about all the things that have conditioned us, it's quite an undertaking. You know, we are made up of this complex set of conditioned beliefs, our view. You know, some we got from our parents, some we got from our peers, some we got from teachers of various kinds, some we've gotten from the government, some we've gotten from the economic system that we live under. You know, and then we've had all our own personal experiences, quote unquote, our anecdotal, you know, energy, or our anecdotal experiences that are added in there. And just to make it more interesting, then we've got genetics. We've got the genetic code and all that they're finding out now. You know, second generation, third generation trauma in certain groups that have now encoded in their genetic code experiences that they've had as a group. And if that's not enough of complexity to being alive in this amazing miracle, if you're open to this business of past lives, where does that all fit in? Those experiences. So we're this little end result of a lot of input, installations in us. So, you know, and our views are constantly being adjusted. Even when we're watching the news, there's a news clip that comes on. We see it, they show a picture, and then a commentator comes on. And a particular commentator, he kind of spins it a little bit to the right. Then another commentator comes on, spins it a little bit to the left. And we're like, what? You know, there can be a little confusion, okay? So, how we think about our experience is conditioned by everything that we've come to believe through our experiences and everything that's been installed in us. And if we've been practicing, we've come to know that some of those beliefs aren't necessarily so wise or skillful in helping us understand what leads to happiness and harmony and what leads to further suffering, our own or others. It's sad to say, but most people, probably of the 7.5 billion people, there's probably a majority of people who kind of live a rudderless existence in a kind of ocean of unconsciousness, of held opinions, assumptions, and beliefs. Dan Goleman says this: our normal consciousness is often highly unhealthy, with a general heaviness and unwieldiness of mental processes, where the force of habit generally predominates, and any changes and adaptations are undertaken slowly and unwillingly, and to the smallest possible degree. That's very depressing. Thoughts tend to be rigid and inclined toward dogma. It often takes a long time to learn from experience or advice that we receive. Our affections and aversions are fixed and biased, and in general, change of character proves more or less inaccessible. Ouch. You know? Luckily, the Buddha has a different perspective on humankind. And there are sets of practices and kind of perspectives that can counter our conditioning. You know, so this view, this complexity of view that we're working with, is the challenge of our practice in all these conditions, learning what they are and exploring the possibility and edges of not simply reflexively acting. Okay. You know, the Buddha used the mind and body mostly as the area of practice. And he wasn't interested in philosophical or metaphysical discussions. He just didn't have any interest in that. His focus always remained on whether a particular thought, word, or action led to harmony or disharmony, suffering or the end of suffering, where the rubber meets the road. That's what he taught for 45 years. One way to kind of simplify or to think of wisdom, and the Buddha always said, there's only 6 things that can happen. You can see something, taste something, hear something, touch something, smell something, or think about something. That's our life. Okay? Any of this can be an object of meditation. Knowing what you are hearing, tasting, touching, when it's happening, is a critical element of this practice. And the difference between a practitioner and a non-practitioner is a practitioner, at least some of the time, is aware of what's going on in the most simple, primal way. All our pets and animal friends, and someone who's not practicing, they are experiencing, of course. Our pets, lots of sentient beings out there, they're experiencing. They're not recognizing what's happening when it's happening. A wise view recognizes that this mind-body is just nature unfolding. It's not I don't own it. It's not self. It's not even personal. It's not me. It's not mine. I can't control it, but to only a small degree. So we practice to further discover this nature of being a human. Wisdom itself can be just quite ordinary, recognizing accurately what's happening when it's happening. That's the deal. Without a big self-involved analysis. Keeping it simple. Somebody rides by on a motorcycle, revs the engine, okay? Well, the mind can run off to, who's doing that? Why are they doing that? What are they trying to prove? What's their problem? That the mind can do that. Or a kind of wisdom touch on that. Oh, there's a sound. I'm conscious of this sound. There's a vibration. I can feel it in my body. There is aversion. I don't like this sound. I'm aware of it. I'm aware of aversion. That's a wisdom touch on that experience. It's just that simple. There's hearing consciousness. It's unpleasant. This is aversion. Just noticing like that is very ordinary wisdom. So this practice is very broad, it's nuanced, it's paradoxical, and yet it's very simple. Our perspective, or this view, I think the German word is Weltanschauung, of life. Really, our practice is paying attention to the nature of nature over and over again. It's both the beginning and the end of practice. So, the view. As we refine it, as we work the path factors, even when we get knocked off our pins, so to speak, that view arises, creates some spaciousness, allows there to be joy even when there is grief. Allows it all. just one of the path factors. So we've gone beyond our time, but if anybody wants to stay and ask any questions or has comments, I'll stay here.